More Than Rich podcast. Today we are here with Phyllis Leavitt, an author and psychotherapist whose work explores profound realms of spiritual and psychological transformation, bringing a unique perspective in human consciousness, offering insights that challenge and expand our understanding of what it means to truly be alive, hoping to explore the power of the mind and divine wisdom, everything that entails and encompasses here today. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So first things first, how did you get interested in all this? Is very complex and spiritual topics. So give me a little bit about your childhood.
Yeah, my childhood, I grew up in a middle-class family in New Jersey, and I had, my family was very well educated, and we looked kind of great from the outside. And I think we probably weren't so great on the inside. And like a lot of families, I think whatever the dysfunction is doesn't necessarily show to the public. And there was sexual abuse in my childhood, and it had a devastating effect on my life. And for the most part, I forgot what happened. And so I just kind of lived feeling like something was terribly wrong, but I didn't really know what it was. And then I lived that way for quite a while. I ended up, and when I was young, people didn't talk. I never heard about therapy, I think, until maybe I was in college. I don't think I ever heard about it. And I don't think anybody I knew talked about therapy or did therapy or really even understood our psychology particularly. But by the time I was in my 30s, late 30s, I had 3 little children, and I finally went to therapy, and I was kind of at a very low point in my life, and very blocked, had a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, and really was blaming myself for all of it. And I think there were so many big things I learned from going to therapy. First of all, I went right to the library. I was always a big reader, and I loved being a student. So I was a big, learning was something that was very, very important to me and very satisfying to me. And I took out a lot of books on psychology right away. And I began to understand that our early conditioning in our family systems and in our immediate communities really has a lot to do with the coping mechanisms we come up with, how we feel about ourselves, what we're attracted to, what we're repelled by, some of the choices we make. And to the extent that people are hurt, I began to understand, to the extent that we're hurt, we develop coping mechanisms and beliefs about ourselves that are not usually very positive. And that's kind of what catches up with people later in life. And out of my experience being a client, which was, was a difficult journey, I began to remember a lot of what had happened to me. And, but I would say that as difficult as it was to remember some of what had happened, it was such a relief to discover the truth and to know that something had actually happened to me that had hurt me rather than I was a flawed human being. And it gave me so much compassion for people, because I think so many people are hurt and blame themselves or are overtly blamed for what happens to them. And out of that, I became a therapist. I decided to go back to graduate school and become a therapist. And I've worked with hundreds of people over the years. And I think my own experience really, really helped deepen the work that I did. The work that I did with people was not theoretical. It really, of course, I learned a lot in graduate school about family systems and about our intrapsychic dynamics and about the ways people cope with the negative experiences they have and how do you access your strengths and your gifts. But I think having made that journey myself, it gave me so much compassion for our essential selves, who's in there buried underneath some of the painful things that have happened to people. So that was the beginning.
Yeah, no, that's a good, because I mean, you had me off on a few questions here where you made me think about like the perception of therapy, because like many people might, there's other ways that people might escape their mind, like doing drugs, and maybe that works for some people, right? And maybe people that don't do drugs, like they don't realize that just having a conversation can like completely open their mind to something else. But like I'm getting at,
Right.
so perception of therapy, and then I'm thinking about the idea of how we all forget our traumas, and it's super useful, whether it's like for educating others later in life, but we don't even remember it because does that mean, is it a good thing to want to go provoke those old thoughts too at the same time? Maybe people, treading on certain waters, whatever. And the last thing is just the therapy stigma. That was all I was going to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the therapy stigma is very unfortunate. I do think it's less now than it might have been when I was young, because when I was young, it was really like there's something wrong with you if you go to therapy, and it's kind of a sign of weakness,
would it be the
that
same
you
as a
need.
mentor in a sense?
It's not exactly the same, just because I think that there are certain techniques in therapy that really help a person get to the bottom of what injured them in their human relations in the first place, and what they made it mean about themselves that wasn't positive, and the coping mechanisms that they developed that weren't necessarily useful. We come up with the best we can when we're kids. Some kids become really aggressive because they're trying to defend themselves. Some kids really shut down and become very isolated and lonely because that's how they're trying to protect themselves. Some people become people pleasers. Some people turn to drugs.
Yeah. No, we're getting into some good stuff. You're evoking some better thoughts, but keep going.
No, and interrupt me if you want to. So just, what brings people to therapy is the pain of their beliefs about themselves and other people and their coping mechanisms not working anymore. We come up with the best we can as children, but if a child chooses to isolate to try to protect themselves from hurt, most of us don't like being isolated when we're adults. We want love, we want connection, we want a sense of belonging. And so there's a breakdown that happens. That's what happened to me. There was a certain breakdown that happened for me when I was in my 30s, and it brought me to the place where I really felt like I needed help to get out of it. And what I want to say to any listening audience is that, and I've worked, like I've said, with so many people who have suffered so deeply in their childhood or in their human relations later. It's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. We don't consider it a sign of weakness if you call the computer guy to fix your computer because you can't fix it yourself. But somehow when it comes to our mental health and our emotional well-being, we feel like we're supposed to have it all together and show the world that we have it all together. And that's actually what can really be painful. And I know that I experienced that myself. I felt a lot of shame about having so much pain. And I think a lot of people do, and they try to hide it, and they try to numb it, they try to distract from it, they try to compensate.
How much of it is unconscious, do you feel?
A
Because
lot.
we're talking about trauma right now, so I would like
Right.
what are your thoughts on hypnotherapy, for example? Because there's other ways to try to like figure out what it is exactly. Maybe you need to go real deep into your mind or subconscious.
I think for the most part, and there may be therapists who disagree with me who do other modalities, but in my experience, I think we do need to remember some of what happened in order to make sense of ourselves. And I know that for me, when I began to remember what happened to me, my whole life changed. I was no longer a mystery, and I had something to work on. And I really think that's true for most people. And so I think it's a shame when we get the message that, well, don't, let sleeping dogs lie. It's in the past. Leave it in the past. If you've been really hurt, it doesn't stay in the past. It affects the way you cope and the way you relate and the kind of relationships you have or don't have. It affects your creativity. It can affect your parenting. It can affect you in the workplace, either as a boss or as an employee. And so for most people, we don't actually leave it in the past. So it's a myth to think you can just close that door and move on. And if you can do that successfully, do it, but I think most of us really can't do that.
For sure. No. Now it made me think, like, can you give me like the topics of your books and then just maybe differentiate them a little bit?
Yeah, the first two books I wrote are called A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire. And those books are very different from this third book that I just wrote now. They're really about my own personal healing journey and what happened for me. And this does has happened for some of my clients. What happened for me, and I would say it happens for everybody who has a healing process in some way. Mine was my own particular version, which is that I really got in touch with something very, very essential in myself, something very deeply spiritual, something very deeply connected to a larger vision of my own journey and of humanity and what we're doing here and what we're working out. You know, I was working on what I was working out in my own life, and I kind of got this big sense of what we're all working out here. And so those first two books are really about that very personal part of my journey from my childhood on. And the third book that I just wrote is called America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. And it was really having gone through my own process of healing and realizing how many people are hurting out there who don't have access to help, who are still a mystery to themselves, and to use your word, which was very well put, are just automatically and unconsciously reacting all over the place because they don't know what's driving them. And I can tell you, I know that experience. I know what it's like to just be unconsciously reacting from, you just don't know why you do what you do, or why you're not drawn to healthier people or healthier situations, or why you can't express the love that you feel inside, or you have a lot of creativity, but it doesn't come out. So you start to like really not be a mystery to yourself. And there's a lot of people who, let me say this, because I think this really talks to a lot of us and but also to a lot of what's going on in the world today, in the human population. And that is, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, so I'll just say it a little bit more clearly now. There's lots of symptoms for having been hurt by other human beings, whether you were called names or bullied or beaten or sexually molested or ostracized or discriminated against because of your race or your gender or your religion. When people are hurt by other people, we tend to have all kinds of symptoms. But there's two kind of threads that people tend to follow. And one is that some people become more passive. They've learned that standing up for themselves or trying to fight back or advocate for themselves or get help doesn't work. Nobody helped them, nobody believed them, or they were punished worse for speaking the truth of what was happening to them. And they become more passive and more easily controlled because some part of them has become helpless. And that is not a fault. That is not a blame. That is an understandable psychological reaction to having been abused, hurt, neglected, whatever. And the other main thread that I've seen is those of us who will do anything not to feel helpless. And we call them people who have identified with the aggressor, and they become aggressive as a way of trying to protect themselves. And so we have more and more people, when you have people who are not treated, who don't get help, who don't get rescue from being hurt by other people, you have more and more people who become passive and easily controlled, and you have more and more people who become aggressive and identify with the aggressor. And I think we see that in America today, and I think we see that all over the world. And it's a very dangerous psychological climate that we're creating, where we have people who really want to dominate and people who are able to be dominated, rather than people who are finding their appropriate power with boundaries. In other words, appropriate power with the sense that other people also have a right to an existence.
Do you think that plays into how everything's being pushed into extremes in cultural society? That's just a part of it.
Absolutely.
In that aspect.
Absolutely. I think it is. And I also think that we tend to be addicted to certain things. I think it's part of human nature to want more of what we think is good. But unfortunately, more of everything isn't always a good. So when people become addicted to power or control or influence or wealth, and they lose their sense of how their desires are impacting the people around them, that's part of this escalation that you're mentioning, I believe.
Do you think this ties into collective unconscious that we're talking about.
Well, I mean, tell me what you mean by collective unconscious, though, so I know what you're referencing.
I mean, what I'm saying is like everybody's perceptions and thinking a certain way over time equates to what the culture represents, in a sense. Does that make sense?
You mean sort of our cumulative learning? Is that what you mean, that we just sort of take for granted?
Yes, because you think about how Western society's just super, I don't want to say docile now, but passive. And it makes me super scary with artificial intelligence even now. Like,
totally.
How serious are we really going to take the concept of, hey, ethics? Really? Like, because corporations really have our best interest. They've always put us first. When money's like, I don't know, it's just really scary that we're having this conversation so late and then it's just kind of getting pushed under the rug.
I think it is scary. And I think that's why I wrote my book, because what I was learning by having been a client myself and really done that deep dive into what was scary to look at and painful to move through, and then seeing that abuse and neglect is widespread in our family systems in America, because it is. I've worked with so many people, and you would never know, they're a teacher or they're a doctor or they have 5 kids and they're bringing up some foster kids, and they're doing their best in the world, and they're really suffering from neglect and abuse and discrimination and early poverty. And they're just trying to compensate and hold it together. And then, I've had people walk into my office and they burst into tears and they'll say, I don't even know why I'm crying. But they do, because they finally found a place to let it all out. It's real.
And that just goes to show, like, I don't want to keep blaming American and Western culture here, but nobody feels safe in their own homes or where they're at or around their own friends and family to express these things.
Yeah. And so it's such, that word safe is so important, because, one of the things that, I want to go back to what you said about, our collective sort of mindset. Because I think one of the things that, there's just so much influence out there all the time, the social media, the news feeds, what's on TV, what's in the movies, all of it is just this blast of global input, on a daily basis, whether what we're hearing is true or not. But, there's some truth there about the conflict, about the wars, about the people that are dying and suffering, about the poverty, about racial and gender discrimination. I mean, there's truth in that. And there's an escalation of, mass murders, for instance, of people that the person who's shooting doesn't even know the people they're killing. This is terrifying, that people have lost so much connection to their own humanity, that the rage and the pain erupts in that kind of way. They're not just evil people. They're people who are hurting so badly that the rage and pain of the rage of their pain is erupting in a violent way.
Not to get like super glib or anything, but are you also somebody who believes the world's also a lot darker than we're aware of?
I think that people are essentially good. I think we're born wired for love and connection. And if you look at any little child and you smile at them and you laugh with them and you play with them, unless they're really already been really hurt, they just light up with love. And I think we are wired for love and connection. And then something happens to us that hurts us, and we become maladaptive in some way on some continuum. So I don't think the world is dark, but somehow I think people, like I said, I think people are essentially good. And I think people want to be loved. I think they want to belong. I think they want to be valued. I think we're starving for leadership that actually is committed to nonviolent conflict resolution. And somehow we end up empowering a lot of bullies.
Yeah, it made me think that most people get into political systems and they're surrounded by corruption, and what are you supposed to do but cave or leave? Basically, one or the other. So
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is, I just lost my thought. uh, I'll keep moving here. How do you interpret the essence of the whole divine love and profound wisdom in your writings? Like, how do those concepts empower our listeners?
Would you say that phrase again?
Divine love, profound wisdom. Like, how do you interpret these for your writings?
You know, yeah, I think there is at least I have had, and I know many people have had an experience of love that really like fills your heart, and it doesn't come from another person. It comes from something bigger than ourselves. And I think that's our birthright. I think we're all really connected to something much bigger than ourselves, however you call it. And if you have that experience, you know, it really changes the way you see humanity, because even if you don't call it divine love, you know, if you just call it a great experience of love or connectedness or at oneness with yourself, or you feel like you've come home in some way to yourself, however you phrase it, I don't know anybody who's had that experience who wants violence in their life, who wants hatred, who wants more disruption or divisiveness. When people experience that kind of love and connection, however they get it, whether it's from another person or from their spiritual journey or from nature or from art or from love of animals, whatever it is, we want to share it. And so for me, you know, I want to share it.
It's funny. You reminded my last question. It was going to be the opposite kind of spectrum of dark world. Do you think the world was also at some point and now more mystical than we're aware of? Like when we come to like our internal and what we can actually project into the world?
You know, I think that there have been cultures, and I'm not a student of history, so I can't like quote you specific data, mm-hmm. but I think there have been cultures that were clearly more connected on a more, I don't know if I'd say global realm, but a more cosmic kind of level of understanding that we're all connected, that we're part of the earth, that we belong to the earth rather than that we own the earth. For instance, I think there are a lot of indigenous people who had a very profound connection to the earth itself, to nature, to the cosmos, and saw themselves as the stewards of what we have here rather than the owners and the possessors and the dominators. And I think we've, for whatever reason, evolutionarily, with our incredible intelligence, which I believe we have incredible intelligence, and I also believe we have incredible emotional capacity for great love and care and generosity and, you know, willingness to give to others. Somehow we've reached this peak in human civilization where we've also figured out how to destroy other people in such ways to get our so-called perceived needs met or our righteousness, whatever, that I think we actually have to make a decision as a human race, not really just as Americans, but of course as Americans, but as a human race about what we're going to do with the intelligence that we have.
One of the books that I'm reading right now is on thought transference. And what's cool about it is the experiments are talking about how animals can know what we're going to do, and they know what we're thinking, and they have certain actions based on what, you know, like our intentions. Like, for example, cats will resent you for certain behaviors that you have toward, and it's just interesting. Like, humans and ourselves have our own thought transference, where I don't want to say telepathy, but telepathy, right? Like that's the gist of our extra senses. Do you have any thoughts on these? And maybe did you ever have any perception experiences of yours as a kid?
Absolutely. I think, let me say a couple of things, and if I get off track, bring me back.
Go crazy.
Sometimes I'm following my own train of thought, you know, and it goes somewhere else. But what I think is that we actually have lots of sense perceptions, but and I think there are probably past cultures that were less complicated, less technological, less, you know, more like kind of grounded in just like how you take care of one another and what you need to do to survive, who had much greater access to that intuitive sense because it was survival. You had to be able to read, the expression on someone's face
Never
or,
thought
right?
of that. Yeah, survival though.
That was survival. And
Like no different than learning how to read and write.
totally. And I think we're all born with that. I think we're born with an innate ability to read what's going on around us, especially in other people. And when you don't live in a healthy environment, in a healthy family, you either cannot trust your own perceptions because they're denied. I didn't say that. I didn't do that. I didn't hit you.
Gaslit. Yeah.
Totally. Or you're punished for your actual truthful perceptions of what's going on. And sometimes
think about academia too, even in the professional world, what we're seeing, right?
Right. So people are not being necessarily taught to tune into their own knowing. And that is actually what the biggest gift of true healing does. And that's what my first two books are about, are the knowing that I came to by loosening up the grip of the trauma that I had experienced. And I really tapped into that inner knowing. And I think we all do that in our own way. What I wrote is not necessarily what you would find. But all is necessary. Your inner knowing is just as important as mine and everybody else's. And together, we would create a different world if we were encouraged to actually uncover our own connection to our deepest self. So we're taught not to trust. The news teaches us not to trust our own perceptions to a great extent. Sometimes, like you said, our educational system. It's actually not the agenda. And it's threatening to the powers that be, that people would actually trust their own perception of the truth and develop, let me say that differently, and heal the wounds that they've encountered and experienced that have kept them from trusting their own understanding.
I hate to get super meta here, but if you really want to
get meta,
I'm like, if you really want to zoom out, I'm like, talk about religion in this aspect, right? Like how we're indoctrinated to believe a certain way, or you're punished to, which is also scary. Because these are spiritual beliefs. These aren't even people in your outside world influencing your thoughts. These are like literal belief systems. So I think you're also speaking to the idea of being open to other perspectives on another aspect. Because if you go to 100%. Therapy, if we're going to therapy, right, I was trying to tie this into Eastern world thinking, because they don't question their professors. They take everything as truth. And in Western society, we want sources for everything. Prove it. You can't tell me otherwise, And it goes to speak with how we're raised and how we respect our elders, for one. But the education systems, our values, us as people, it says a lot, honestly, how we trust people and the information that we get.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, the bottom line is, how do you control a population? If you control thought, if you control belief.
Population.
Right.
In the history of the world.
And so these are what I call mental health issues, because mentally healthy people can tolerate that you have a different point of view. They might not like it, but we learn to tolerate taking in other people's reality, other people's point of view, and then sharing our reality from an honest but respectful place. And I think it's a mental health issue when people cannot tolerate any kind of conflict or disagreement or diversity. I mean, diversity is a kind of disagreement, right?
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Coming back to the psi aspect, though, did you ever have any early experiences, or you're like, whoa, like having, my mind's different, the world is different than I anticipated?
I had, I don't know what I thought the world was supposed to be, because I think I was, I want to say unconscious. I mean, I was just being conditioned by what was around me, and I was trying to survive, like we all are. But I had the blessing, for whatever reason, I don't know why, that I would intermittently have these profound experiences that just came to me. I didn't create them. So in the beginning, the very first ones that I can remember are that I left my body when I was a little girl. And it was a beautiful experience. It was
just
just
more details on that.
All I remember is it would happen at night, and it would happen before I went to sleep, and I would find myself floating up on the ceiling, and I felt like I was in
projecting.
I guess, but it just happened. Nobody ever talked about it, and I never told anybody about it. Definitely. But it was a beautiful, peaceful experience, and I never wanted to come back.
Yeah, you're giving me memories, because mine were just like,
oh, really?
Like there was no gravity type of dreams. I could definitely fly. Yeah, those were the type that you would wake up so mad that they weren't real, right? Like you were almost wanting to cry. Yeah.
So some of these were waking. That was a waking experience.
Never thought about that.
And definitely I had those flying dreams, and they were just magnificent. And then when I was a little bit older, I had some amazing experiences in nature where I was in college and I was walking through, it's really hard to describe because it's not like anything, people usually say, but I was in Boston. That's where I went to college. And I was walking through Boston Commons by myself. And it was a really beautiful, afternoon. Sun was shining and the breeze was blowing and the flowers were blooming. And all of a sudden, this is the way I would say it, a veil just lifted. And I experienced every single thing around me as a living being. The wind was a living being. The trees were living beings, the flowers, the earth, the sunlight. And I was just a part of it. I wasn't, and it was this incredible experience of, it was joyous. It was absolutely joyous. Like I wasn't this separate person anymore. I was just another living being on the earth. But I'm not really describing it because I can't. And I would have these breakthrough moments in the midst of a lot of pain, a lot of loneliness, a lot of pain, a lot of questioning why I was here, what was wrong with me.
Yeah.
And then
I didn't realize that, but no, that's the only one that I had. Like I was like, yeah, it was in those feelings and emotions that you're specifically talking about. It's very strange though that arrives at your bottomest, right? Like the lowest of low in a sense.
Yeah.
That's weird. And that's the commonality.
But you know what that showed me, because it's happened to me throughout my life, that there'll just be some beautiful experience that comes in sometimes at my lowest moments. And it really shows me that on that level of consciousness, there's no judgment. And we live in a world of judgment. And I think that's what we're trying to evolve out of, because our judgment is what has us hate people and make them other and feel entitled to act out on them or take from them.
You're talking about binary thinking, really, because everybody's picking sides on everything. And I'm like, why can't you just have an opinion on both and like them both, or not like them both?
Right. Right. Why can't we expand ourselves to tolerate diversity is really what it is. I think in our smaller selves, we just want everybody to be like us, or believe the way we do or whatever.
Ingo Swann has a great book on this called, I think, Reality Boxes. And he discusses like in a very metaphysical way of how we are all raised from a young age. And if you just imagine, we all have our own little perception reality box around our brains. It's a great analogy. But we all live in this box. Everyone does.
We do. And I think part of personal growth is expanding out of just that limited point of view that we're either conditioned by or we came in with that. And there's nature and nurture, but nurture has a lot to do with it. And that part we can really be responsible for.
Also, think of the idea that he had to write a book like about being open to more, because he was getting so much criticism in his life about these abilities. I just remember him being on podiums and seriously speaking about these powers and abilities that we have while the crowd's just like laughing and mocking him, and he'll just look up at them. And it's not like they care about the experiments and government projects he was involved in. He just goes back to reading. And it's so insulting, right? Like, I feel like that too about when you interview someone who's like dedicated 30, 40, 50 years to a profession, whether it's in ufology or some abstract thing that no one would ever study, like parapsychology, for example, doesn't exist. Only one person, Jeffrey Mishlev, right? And I think if we want to get into that, like, we're coming back to control, right? Controlling the narrative, maybe like, hey,
Right.
imagine if a whole population was getting degrees in parapsychology. Imagine that.
Right. Right.
Wow.
Imagine if we even just learned about our own conditioning and could free ourselves up from some of the negative beliefs and the negative role models and the negative conditioning that we have about ourselves and other people, we'd have a different world. We'd have that openness. We would have it. One of the images that came to me very early on in my journey was the image of I don't know if you've heard of it, but a fly's eye is a composite eye, and it's made up of thousands of different lenses. And each lens in the fly's eye sees a different part of what the fly is looking at, but the brain puts all those images together. And
once.
yeah, at once. So I it would have to, or the fly would just, smack into a tree. And I thought that was the most beautiful analogy to humanity. We're all a lens. And what if we really committed ourselves, instead of like trying to like destroy somebody else's lens, put them together and have that, super brain that I think we actually could have if we were open to putting everybody's point of view together and creating a whole picture. And then we're each tasked with trying to do that ourselves,
Yeah. Can you, I wanted to get a little bit into like synchronicity. So I'm curious if you can talk about how like it alters our perception of chance and coincidence. Like what deeper meanings unfold?
I don't know about chance and coincidence. I think that that's our perception in our normal state of being. When I look back on my life, even when I was my most unconscious, when I was most lost, there was something guiding me. There was something from when I was a little girl telling me to write. I began writing when I was like in junior high school.
Nice.
And I've always followed that thread. And so something in me was guiding me to do that. Something in me, and I really believe this. And I think a lot of people, when you look back on your life, it's like, well, how did I end up there? I grew up on the East Coast, but I ended up in the Southwest one of the summers of when I was in college, and I fell in love with the Southwest, and I had to come back. And I came back, and this is my home. And, so many magical things happened for me out here. I had, just have it like, again, it's that, is it guidance from some magical place? Or is it that some part of our own inner knowing actually knows where we belong and what we're supposed to be doing, even if our conscious mind doesn't know it at the time?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you also made me hope, like, in the best case scenario, that AI could make education more personalized in a sense. Because, like, currently, it makes me think when I was younger, and I can probably speak for most younger people, when you're taking away certain topics to learn, or, like, for example, like, I was, like, really into cursive at one point. Like, I got really good at it, or super, I'm just saying, like, they pull back a bunch of things, or math, for example. They just started doing the bare minimums for things like, okay, we'll sign here and you'll graduate anyway. You don't have to learn these things. And it's just pulling back on standards. So I'm curious on like, just what you think about this in general on our society. And we don't really know what's best for us when we're young, and how easy it is for someone older than us to just take things away, to dumb us down over time.
Yeah. I think the goal of education is, or one of them, of a good education is to have it be, to open students to many different points of view. so that they can think for themselves instead of being taught how to think. I have a very specific memory. And this is a little bit off, but it's the same idea of being in a classroom in elementary school and the art teacher drawing a bird on a branch on the board, and we were to copy it exactly. And it's a sad memory, because what if you just said, draw a bird the way you see a bird? And then everybody share their picture of a bird instead of the whole class drew the bird that the teacher drew.
Yeah, I see.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, what's your version or perception of this instead of you failed because it's not exactly what I thought? Yeah.
Right. And what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, you're setting up different expectations. I get it. Or maybe you shouldn't be setting expectations is the problem, right?
Well, I think teaching, it's like, for me, how I've learned is partly through my own experience and really like delving into myself and asking myself. But part of it is I have learned many things from other people. I've read incredible books that have taught me amazing things about family systems, about our psychology, about nature. I've learned so much from other people, but I've kind of held a place where I do with that learning what works for me. It's like, so if somebody says, what's your style of being a therapist? I always say it's very eclectic. I take from this and I take from that and I take from the other, and somehow I make that all my own. And so there are things to learn from other people without any doubt, about science,
you just used art as like a metaphor for teaching, and can you speak to how maybe creatives don't know their value?
Well, I don't think we don't live in the Renaissance where the artists were like commissioned to do their great art and
they're not making the chapels anymore.
Supported by society. I mean, and look what they created. I mean, amazing, phenomenal art. I think we've moved a little bit away from that to a much more technological. But again, it's not to throw out technology. There are gifts of technology, but how do we find balance? How do we have technology here and art here and nature here and human relations here and computer science here? And, and again, that composite eye, we need them all.
Are there any aspects that you are excited about for the future in AI? I know we got into the doom and gloom aspect of it, but what about the positives?
I wish I could say that I knew more about AI. I have not really investigated it. There's probably a lot of information that can be shared very, very quickly. And I think that's probably a great, I had someone who was working on my website at one point, and he just on his own tapped into some AI information about something that was on my website, and he put it there. I didn't want it there because that wasn't really my message, but I read it, and he didn't tell me. He just told me that he wrote this thing. I knew immediately it was AI. It was very well written. It had a lot of great information in it, and there was no person in it.
Yeah, no personal anecdote or story or yeah.
No,
it's important.
And I'm not saying that all AI is like that. I really don't have the knowledge to comment on it, but it had an interesting impact on me. It's like, I don't want this. I don't want this on my website. I appreciate that somebody could plug in, one word and get paragraphs that had very accurate information, very accurate information. So I think there's a place for it, I guess I would say, as long as we keep the person and we keep our humanity and we have a mind that is evaluating how we use it.
Yeah. The other thing is, you made me think I've gotten a lot of important people's attention by super personalizing things, right? Like using it to personalize and get in touch. But it also makes me learn about their life within that message that you like, wow, I didn't know you did all that, or your family that you tied into this. So it's really interesting that somebody might also at the same time be like, whoa, you took a lot of time to really get to know me when it could have taken 10 seconds to learn your whole life now, right? Like,
right.
It's interesting.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting how we can leverage it. Coming back a little bit to the collective unconscious, what kind of influence do you think it has on like societal norms and personal beliefs, like from your perspective?
You mean the collective unconscious that we're living in today?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, I guess I would say it this way, at great risk of sounding, however, I think we have to wake up out of the collective unconscious. I think that's where our personal growth is taking us. I really do. Um, there may be wonderful things in there, but there's a lot of very short-sightedness, a lot of bias, a lot of, I would say, really short-sightedness about immediate gratification and not the long-term effects of our human behavior on ourselves and the planet.
It's a really good way to summarize it. I'm just like, I wonder what you've been doing with your time, but seeing the same patterns and things. What are some prevalent myths about the human mind that you believe need correcting?
Wow, that's a good question. Let me think for a second here. Myths about the human mind. Well, I think maybe, I don't know if it's a prevailing myth in the way that it's spoken, but I think there is a prevailing myth that we are at a pinnacle of knowledge when I think the human mind is capable of ever expanding. I don't think we know the potential of the human mind, especially if the human mind is integrated with the human heart. And so, I think, and maybe every generation is like that. They think they know more than everybody else, and that's the end of it. But actually, if we just look at human history, even if you don't know a lot about human history, we have been evolving. And so I think one of the things that I think that we really need to look out for is how is all of our technology, all of our computerized information, AI, all of our technological advances, again, as helpful as they may be in certain areas of our lives, how are they affecting the development of our brain? And I think a lot of research really needs to be done about what's happening to our brain when we are, and this goes back to survival, when we're not tuning into our own instinctual understanding to survive, but we become more and more dependent on technologies to survive. What happens to us? And do we have the actual wisdom, and I would say wisdom, not even intelligence, but wisdom, to use our technologies in a way that still further our connection to our humanity and to each other?
Yeah, you made me think it's going to be very obvious in the future to differentiate who's using it educatedly in a sense, and then who doesn't know what they're doing later, right? Like that'll become, what practices would you suggest for developing deeper self-awareness or self-actualization?
Yeah. Well, I think, I do think therapy is great. I know that not everybody has access to that. I think reading lots of different people's perspectives. I know that when I was really young, way before I ever went to therapy or had the thought of going to therapy, I found myself reading all these biographies and autobiographies of people who had overcome great odds. So something in me drew, it inspired me, and I saw what other people were doing, and it gave me hope. But repeat that question.
Just developing deeper self-awareness, pursuing self-actualization practices.
Oh, yeah. I think pursuing any form of creativity is a growth process, whether it's you're making a garden, you're feeding a cat, you're an artist, you're a musician, or you just listen to music. But I think creativity is a great form, not only to release sometimes what's blocked in a person, but to inspire. And it's a certain kind of food. And I think human beings, and this is something I really want to write more about, we need food on many, many levels. We need good emotional food. We need intellectual food. We need physical food. We need relationship food. We need nature food. And I think we need what I call spiritual food, and I'm not attached to that if that's not somebody's calling. But I think where we're going, and this is part of what I say when I think we have to wake up out of our collective unconscious, to the extent that that's not serving us and maybe leading us down a very warlike kind of path, that we really need to identify as a human race what is good food for human beings. And what I have learned as a therapist is that the best food for human beings is love. Love and belonging.
Spiritual nourishment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I got you.
And when we don't have it, we really suffer.
You made me think about coming back to the concept of monetizing on your books, right? Because I find that admirable, because it's super hard for me, not just as a songwriter, like forget the music industry and whatever, like the perception and how hard that is already in itself. Even just for when I make paintings as an artist, I find it super hard to sell something like sentimental that I made that's personal. I always gift them to people that I like care about, my friends and family and things.
Nice.
And that's,
nice.
Yeah. And then because I've done that, it's hard to even want to sell them in the future. I'm like, I've always just given them away, but it's a cathartic thing, right? Like what we're talking about, as you're saying, writing the book. And I don't know, maybe you can just speak a little to like the difficulty. Was it hard to learn to monetize, like, or just to put your own personal experiences out there and be like, I'm going to make money on it? You know, it's not like it's, I don't know. That's where I consider it admirable.
You know, I have no care about making money from it. I really want to share what I think would be helpful. And of course, we live in a world where we need money to survive. That's just, we don't all grow our own food, and, we can't create the gas for our cars and all that stuff. But I think we live in a world, unfortunately, where people do have to monetize some of their creativity to survive. But for me, would I like a return on my book? Yeah, it'd be great. But that's not my motivation, and I never think about it. I just think about how could I get out what I think would be helpful.
Can you elaborate how that is also the key to success, though? Because I feel like a lot of people make art or make music because they see other people and they think they can make money with it, when in reality, if you're not true to yourself and just doing it because you love it, likely nothing's going to come from it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know the whole answer to that. I mean, there's theories about, if you let go and you totally surrender, then you get everything you want. Or if you visualize it and you make a collage, it'll happen. And I think those things are all good. They're all great. For me, what I come back to is, why am I doing this? And it really comes from my deepest self. That I wrote the books that I wrote, that I wrote the book that I just wrote, that I go on podcasts and talk about it, because I really feel like we need each other. We need each other. And so I just come back to my why. And I feel like, I'm a lot older than you. And I think sometimes about, where do I want to be when I leave this earth? And I just want to know that I did everything that I could, that my spirit asked me to do, really. And I think all of our spirits or our essences or our hearts or however you say it, there's something that we want to express in the world. I'm doing it my way. You're doing it your way. And if we can encourage each other to do that, my guess will be that eventually, and it'll be long after I'm gone, that we won't live in such a monetized world. I don't think we will. I don't think it's sustainable what we're doing.
That's a good point. And I wish that was a good way to say, hey, we need to crash the system for a positive reason, right? Because there's a lot of negatives that come with the aspect of change. There's a lot of fear that comes with that. But what I think you said does embody the more than rich ethos, like the whole theme of the show, right? Like you don't make art because you're trying to make money. You don't do what's true to you to monetize on it. It's a byproduct. If it happens, that's cool. That's cool. But it wasn't that. It wasn't the purpose. But how has the American pursuit of happiness and fulfillment been shaped by cultural forces, in your view?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think it's been shaped a lot by monetization, and acquisition. Yeah, and acquisition, and I think it's, I guess what I think is that, and my hope is that, one way of looking at it is kind of a pendulum swing. We developed all these technologies and made life very different. You have washing machines and refrigerators, and people aren't out plowing the fields from morning till night. Most of us, we're buying our food in the grocery store. Or those of us who live in a country where you can do that. And so, I think the pendulum has swung way in the direction of acquisition and more and better, and, have to have the latest phone and a bigger TV and a better car, whatever. And like I said, I don't believe it's sustainable. And I think the pendulum is going to swing back to the middle. I think it's going to have to swing back to the middle. And my hope for
rapidly? Do you think it'll happen pretty quickly?
I really don't know the answer to that. I think we're reaching the tipping point of our sustainability on a lot of levels, psychologically, because so many people have become so warlike and so aggressive and so dominating and so greedy. I think on a planetary level, we're hurting the planet, every single day, massively. We're hurting the atmosphere. We're hurting the water. We're hurting the soil. We're hurting the plants. Yeah. So I don't know when the actual tipping point is going to tip over, but what I hope and pray is that we can all be part of tipping it over in a peaceful, loving, kind way, that we help educate each other to make a transition without having to be killed by a tsunami first.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, real. That's literal and metaphorical at the same time.
Yeah.
Can you discuss a case where applying maybe Jungian psychology, for example, led to like a significant therapeutic breakthrough? That's just one example. You can,
you probably could talk about that better than I never studied Jung in graduate school.
Freud?
So I really didn't.
Nice.
I focused a lot on working with children and families, and I worked a lot with abuse and neglect. So I never got into the Jungian kind of point of view. So if you have something great to say about it, I'd love to hear it.
No, I was just curious if you had any like hard stances on or applied any of his methods or anything. That's all.
I don't have any hard stances on anything except, maybe you could say it's a hard stance, but I wouldn't use those words. That I think we have to heal and develop compassion for one another and actually treat other people the way we want to be treated. I think that's in a nutshell the challenge that the human race faces if we want to stay here on this planet.
Well, it sounds doom and gloom, but it's real though. Like, especially if we're considering the tipping point aspect, right? Like, I do agree with that. And I also consider how much of that is generational too, right? We're always feeling like that at the very end of something, every generation. What advice would you give to those feeling detached from their creative or spiritual essence?
Detached from their creative? Yeah. I would just say start with anything that calls to you. If it's just having a plant in your house that you take care of, if it's that you love nature, go for a walk, feel the sky, feel the earth, feed yourself some kind of good food in some way, in some area of your life. And a lot of people really don't feel connected and they're numbed out. And you probably are familiar with this because I think we all are, that there's something about numbing out that perpetuates itself. You watch TV and you watch more TV. You have a drink, you have another drink. You do something mindless or you whatever, and you just keep doing it. And then the more you do it, the harder it is to break that cycle and actually drop in to something meaningful inside yourself. And so sometimes it really takes some discipline.
Pleasure-consumed society.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
And it's not really pleasure after a while. It leaves a lot of people empty.
I mean, I think about how much I consume coffee and I'm like, damn, I need to wait. It's just not as enjoyable,
Right.
How can psychological models be employed to deepen our societal understanding and address pervasive social issues?
Yeah, I think what I would say is I often talk about, because I think it's so urgently needed. Some of the tools that we've developed in the best psychology or mediation or healing principles that are applied in human relations really talk about deep listening, about restraining our most reactive impulses to slam the door, shout, blame, call names, whatever we do, when we're really triggered, but to really restrain that and learn how to listen. And I've written a lot about this. I have a whole chapter about this in my book about, I call it the 6 elements of repairing relationship. And they're all based on one thing. And that is taking responsibility for yourself instead of pointing the finger at other people, because we've just been so conditioned to shame and blame other people. Yeah. And
I think it's instead of taking a lot of projection.
Absolutely. 100% projection.
Yeah, that's a really good way to summarize it. But it made me think of just how much that I was deflecting or like thinking I was trying to escape when I was younger, in a sense, just by putting up with other people's, their emotions or their traumas and things.
Mm-hmm.
Just and even as a kid, here's a funny one. I remember middle school, people would evoke me and be like, "What's your last name?" Like that was a conversation starter for people. And then because they wanted to understand my skin color. And then they'd be like, "What's your religion?" And when I would say Catholic, they'd be like, "Oh, we're Christian." And I'm like, "How is that? Like, do you not know where they come?" And then it was just a dividing point for like making friends and stuff. And I would always think to myself, yeah, it was just super strange to me that like, wait, so I'm getting to that because I wanted to talk about like bias there, where even now, since I, as a kid, always knew how it felt to be just preconceived and judged by how I looked, I didn't change myself, right? Like, I know that if I did my hair well and wore dress shoes and looked, people might think of me differently and I might have a business acumen and things like that, right? But I actually like to feed into that. Like, people don't think the way I look, I'm gonna carry a book around and things. So I want to dispel these stigmas if you see me reading or something. In that aspect, it made me double down on my personality because
good for you.
Because I was just like, but it also at the same time, I'm saying that because whenever I see people, I don't assume things about them anymore. Because I know what that felt like. I'm like, you look a certain way, who knows what your intelligence level is? Like a lot of people assume if you can't speak English properly, but you know multiple languages, they might assume you're not intelligent. You know how hard it is to speak multiple languages?
No, I grew up the same way. I grew up with learning a lot of prejudice, and I just think that we're like that. One group thinks the other group is inferior or less than or less intelligent, or why do they believe that? That's a stupid belief, or whatever we do. And it's all about projection.
Imagine me coming home to my mom trying to be like, "Can you explain these religions and how they're different? Because why are they telling me, And it's not. It really wasn't a big deal.
Right. One of the things I learned as a therapist it's just really profound for me is, because I've worked with so many people, besides having my own history of whatever I went through, I've worked with so many people who were so terribly mistreated in childhood, just years of nobody really loved them. They were just outcast in their own family. They were beaten. They were raped. Yeah. I mean, it's widespread.
Real.
And then I think, we don't know. Somebody walks by you on the street. They're the person behind the counter. Maybe they're in a bad mood. We don't know.
All these life experiences right next to you. Yeah.
Right. And so, I think when you have the opportunity to understand what people experience, it grows compassion, it grows patience, it grows tolerance. It's like, yeah, maybe that person's grumpy. Maybe they have, maybe they go home to a spouse that beats them. We don't know. And they're just doing the best they can to hold on. And maybe a little love coming from us could go a long way.
What about like processing like this limitless perception? Because I think that's kind of what we're getting into. Because when I come back a little bit to what I'm saying earlier, like the idea of dividing religions made me have this bad taste in my mouth for like, oh, well, we're already not agreeing on something at such a young age and it's so minuscule to me. So it made me like not want to associate with anything in that aspect. I don't believe in anything, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you my experience with it. So, and this really comes out of having done so much work in the field of psychology and psychotherapy and family dynamics and interpsychic dynamics and all of that. And my experience is that we play out our wounds no matter where we go. Somebody who has become very aggressive and identified with the aggressor is probably going to be that way in their place of business. They're going to be that way on the schoolyard. They're going to be that way with their spouse and their children. And they're going to be that way in their place of worship. And so we bring our unhealed wounds wherever we go. And I think a lot of religion is actually really informed by people's unhealed psychology.
You know, I just want to say this real quick. I had gotten former employers before I got them the Deming Management book. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not. What's it called?
It's the Deming Management.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
Or the Deming method. So basically, it's a long story short. It's about caring about your employees, really. And I know it sounds crazy, but to actually
no, it doesn't sound crazy to me.
Yeah, to actually care about what motivates and drives them, and getting to know your employees personally. But I would get my bosses these books and stuff, and I noticed that not only did they not care, but they were like even more grandiose after the fact. Like, wow. Yeah, like extremely flashy. And it really put in perspective. I was like, I mean, I didn't ever feel valued, and I always felt like I knew the most, but I wasn't going to express that, you know. I just always did what I was expected. And it's just interesting though. But from the beginning, everywhere I go, I've always felt if you would have just trusted me with more responsibility, none of these bad things would ever happen. But people are always on the fence about maybe me or what I can handle or what I'm capable of. And I've always hated
maybe they're
that.
competing with you, you know, and they don't want you to be. Yeah. I mean, I've worked with many people over the years who what they were working on was what was going on in their workplace. And they were all dysfunctional family dynamics. Somebody was competing with you, so they held you down, or they didn't like the color of your skin, so you never got a promotion.
And we're just talking about work dynamics. Imagine people that deal with this with family members. That must be horrible. To compete with family or to have them against you, like, that's traumatic.
It happens all the time. It happens all the time.
I consider myself lucky just to have good relationships with my siblings, you know?
You are lucky to have good relationships with your siblings, and I'm sure you have something to do with that because you're probably a good sibling. You know?
Yeah, for sure. Right? For sure. And it's funny, though, because I'm aware of my own flaws, though. Like, I know that I need to care more and be more involved or ask them even more questions than just telling them how I'm doing and updating them with my life all the time. So I'm completely aware what I got to work on and my flaws as a human, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think what you're bringing up is one of the gifts of the best healing, and that is you develop more and more awareness of yourself. Without that awareness, we are on automatic pilot, whether we're triggered or we're just doing what we already knew and we learned, and that was the role model. But as you develop self-awareness and begin to heal some of what hurt you, you have more choice about how to behave with other people in the world.
Yeah. Spiritual healers that might have existed in history. Like, we could say Jesus, for example. But do you have any thoughts on them? Like, whether they were maybe E.T. or if they were just channeling Reiki and traveling the world, for example. Like, what are your thoughts? What do you think it might have been?
I think that there definitely were people, and I think Jesus was one of them, who really had a higher level of consciousness than most people have today. And but I also
documenting, right?
Yeah. And I also think that kind of evolution of consciousness is really trying to evolve now. I think that's part of what the tipping point is about. We're either going to tip into self-destruction, which, you know, I don't know that we will, but I think it's possible with the kind of weaponry that we've created and the destruction of some of our planetary home. But I think that there is a very strong, deep impulse in many, many people. It's not necessarily in the news. It's not necessarily all over social media, but of people who really do want to evolve to a more loving, cooperative, aware, sense of our need and our need for one another to survive here, and our deepest connection to one another. So I do think that that's happening.
I like that. What are some practical exercises or rituals you recommend for those seeking to tap into deeper conscious states? I mean, besides meditation, of course, right?
Yeah, I mean, meditation is a good one. I think your creativity is one. I think
Flow state,
journaling.
right?
Yep. And for anybody who is drawn to journaling in any way, I learned a practice that actually became something very extremely valuable to me that I wrote about in my first two books. Someone suggested somewhere that there was a journaling practice where you just, you ask a question about your life. What am I up against in relationship, or why blah, blah, why am I not getting along with so-and-so? It can be anything. And then you just ask in your mind for your highest self to answer that question. Put your pen on the paper and write whatever you hear. And that's a way of beginning to tap into our own knowing, our deepest intuition. I think we all have a higher self, and many people have just never learned that there's a way to tap into it.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I mean, I would like to believe that's the truth too. How can listeners discern the difference between genuine psychological insights and maybe mystical experiences?
I think there might be a connection between them. And so there might be a flow. I think for me, my healing brought me also into deeper mystical experiences. I don't know that that's true for everyone, or if everyone wants or needs that. But I think to the extent that we heal and we're not running on just automatic reactivity and our triggers and our biases and our judgments and our projections, that there's more space for that connection to actually be present in our awareness. And I've seen a lot of people who did a lot of healing work, and they very naturally moved into a more spiritual connection in themselves.
My craziest one that I just wanted to speak on briefly was, I guess I got so frustrated with something that had happened in my life that I went into like a meditation with such like anger that I just had these extreme waves leaving my body of energy that I just never felt before. Like I didn't even like I had been Googling the words just Kundalini, trying to understand it, like what just happened. I thought I had some crazy awakening just because it felt like an extreme level of ecstasy just leaving my entire body, like from the fingertips to my toes type of feeling all over. And just the fact that I can describe it, and it was leaving in waves, like literally just leaving like that, just going outwardly, like literally outward. That's the best way I can describe it. But that experience in itself, and the fact that I was just so frustrated or upset, like wanting change so deeply, like such a deep level of anger, though. I wish I could describe what it was that evoked it, now looking back.
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I had a very similar experience. I was sort of deep in the pain of a memory of something that had happened to me, and all of a sudden I had waves of, I just call it divine love. Just actually physically, I felt them in my body and all around my body. And I just believe that sometimes we're blessed. I call that just there's no name for that experience, but it's grace. It's like that love is there. It is there for us. I really believe it. And, it's not there all the time. I think that there's sort of a communication going on not necessarily in our conscious mind, but
like ethereal, maybe.
Yeah, where some part of us is reaching for that, and some part of that reaches down to us, and then we're shown what the work is to do. I used to always say every moment of light that I had revealed more of the darkness that I needed to work with and undo. And I think that's maybe how it works for some people.
Downloads is a real thing, like spiritual downloads. That aspect.
I do think it's real.
I mean, we're in computers, right? We're using it for the same aspect. And I guess if you want to think about, what is it called? There's like the fractal aspect, zooming out, like I'm saying, the metaphor of it. Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah. Well, look at what some of the geniuses pre-technology were able to do. Some of the mathematicians, the people who
Wow.
understood the cosmos, the people who, were able to do incredible things with math to build these incredible architectural structures that were like, how did they do that? Where did that knowledge come from?
Have you
It
heard
came from somewhere.
have you heard the notion that our brains are pre-wired to not do the things that we're good at? Because we learn how to
No,
do something and then we want to move on to something else, basically. So it just becomes less important. So
huh? Say
we're
more about that. Say more
like
about that.
like we're it makes me think about like all the things I'm super passionate about. I'll be lazy about them. That's what it makes me think of. Because I know I'm super good at it. I'll get to it whenever, and I'll do my best when I get to it. In that sense, you end up procrastinating, and that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense though. Like we're wired to neglect the things that we're actually best at. To,
Well, I think that there's some truth in that dynamic for sure, because lots of people express that very thing, and I've
Mhm.
experienced that myself. And I think that we may be wired, that way. It also may be that we in ourselves experience the same resistance that we see in our society around us. So some part of us wants to grow and evolve, and then there's another part of us that's keeping us asleep. And we see people, trying to innovate better ways to, create community or agriculture that's safer. And then there's all these forces of resistance. No, we're not going to do that. And it costs too much or takes too much time or whatever. And I think we have in ourselves that same, what do you call it? Oppositional forces. Like some part of us really wants to grow and evolve. And the other part of us is okay to stay asleep. And when the okay to stay asleep part kicks in, it's like, I don't want to do that. It's too much work, or I'll do it later.
yeah, it made
But
me think
then,
about Maslow's hierarchy, right?
mm-hmm,
Yeah,
say more, say more.
just I mean, especially American society when we're all accustomed to a certain way of living. Now we're all complaining about things that don't matter anymore because we don't have to focus
Right,
on survival, right? We can focus on the
right,
drama of
right,
society, the things
right.
that
But
aren't
we
important.
actually have to focus on survival.
Yeah,
That's the
especially when
thing,
corporations
right?
are the corporations are buying up everything while we just are focused on who did what, you know?
Right, right. And that's that. I don't know, different religions call it different things, but it's just this deep, dense web of unconsciousness that we're really needing to evolve our way out of. And I think one of the best ways to look at that rather than, okay, it is that way. That's there. That density is there. That programming to stay asleep and distract yourself with who's right and who's wrong in the next Coliseum event in politics or whatever. Um, that's actually could be our motivation, and use it as fuel rather than fight it.
We could have a few more questions. What about like long-term influence? How do you hope your work will have an individual's perception, like on their mental health, spiritual capabilities, your impact?
Yeah. What I really hope is that there's so many things, but I'll say one or two, that we really get that psychology is a really big missing piece in our conversation. Psychology is not partisan. It's not committed to divisiveness or violence or hatred or blame or retaliation or one-upmanship. It's the opposite. Psychology is to heal us of our hurt and to help people have healthier relationships with one another, bring them together. And if we don't factor our psychology into our politics, we're just going to have more of the same.
Yesterday, I was speaking with a podcast guest, and we were speaking about psychology and how there's not an agreement, I think, against psychiatry, right? And that
Oh,
those are the two.
psychiatry?
Yeah, so those
Uh-huh.
are the two kind of. What are your just thoughts on that, just briefly, on the separating the two?
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, I'm not a psychiatrist. In my experience, in all the years that I was a therapist, it seemed as if the psychiatrists that some of my clients saw were pretty much focused on the medication end of. They didn't do a lot of therapy. They did a
Mhm.
lot of medication intervention.
You're going to say balance, aren't you?
So I think that I think when people are really non-functional, sometimes medication is very, very helpful. But I think that a lot of what people suffer from is not, they don't need an antidepressant for, or they may need
the last solution in a sense. Huh?
Right. What they need is to be in a healthy environment, to work with their family dynamics, to work with the wounds that they've encountered and suffered and heal them. And in other words, to heal the source of the depression. Yes, medication, if you're non-functional and you can't get out of bed. And there are people who are like that. And bless them that they have the opportunity, or any of us, not them, but any of us, to take an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication. But the whole purpose, one of the whole purposes of the book that I wrote is to say that we as a society are not creating that healthy family system for so many Americans. And of course, this is happening all over the world.
I think one of the main things that I dealt with a lot as a kid, and I mean, I'm kind of glad I got it out in a young age, but I drank a lot in high school, right? And it caused a lot of conflict with my own mom. But I got that out very young age. Alcohol, didn't really care for it after that. But I know that a lot of, in my life, all my stress has been anxiety. Can you speak to anxiety? I'm sure a lot of people deal with that, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's part of what I dealt with, was a lot of anxiety. And I think that a lot of it stems from unhealed wounds that we've suffered, and our system sort of stays on high alert, even when there's no danger. It's sort of it's like an understandable response to something that wasn't okay. We really were not safe if you were bullied, or you weren't included, or you were having to defend yourself, or you weren't loved, or something else was happening. We go on alert. That anxiety is designed to try to protect us. But unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily go away. And so I think getting to the roots of where, what caused the unease, the fear, the stress, and the anxiety is part of it. And then really creating a situation for ourselves as much as humanly possible that doesn't keep repeating what happened to us, which is a lot of what people do unconsciously. We do what we know.
And I know this is different for everyone, but I'm the type of person where I need to be working on a lot of things at once. And it's become more and more important for me to schedule and use my time even more wisely. But coming back to your point on creative things, when I'm painting, that was the only time that I'm wow, I'm not thinking about anything. I'm high off, no thoughts right now. That's incredible, right? That has such an influence of just, it doesn't, I'm just giving one example, right? You can express yourself creatively in any way. Some people are just good with their hands and just need to go outside with some pieces of wood, right? And some tools.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we really have to pay attention to as a society, because children have become so passive in front of their devices.
Wow.
That they're I wasn't even allowed to watch TV during the day when I was a kid. We had to go outside and do something. And we need that. Kids and kids are fed by building a fort, or, drawing something on the sidewalk and making up a game, right?
Yeah. Building forts for sure.
Yeah.
It's funny.
But I really wanted to say that when you talked about painting, I used to paint much more than I really don't do it now, because I'm so focused on writing, but it was the happiest creativity that I ever had. And I had the same experience as you. Hours could pass. I wouldn't notice if I was hungry or had to pee, whatever.
Yeah, it's funny. It's so true though. And the other thing I learned about that was, whenever you like something, just stop. Because I ruined so many great pieces because I was it could be better though. But then if I just add one more, and I'm dude, it was a great 3 layers ago. What are you doing? Now you're trying to save it.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great advice.
Yeah. And that's all mediums. Have you felt like that with writing? Maybe have you ever overdone it, or felt like I need to pull back?
Sometimes I overwork things, but I'm kind of a perfectionist. But I think that, I think that what's important even if you overwork something, or maybe it's not overworking it, maybe you have to get it to a certain place. I mean, maybe there's paintings you've done where that hasn't been the case, that you worked on it and it came out, how you wanted it. I think the important thing is that you stay with the impulse of what you wanted to create and stay true to that. And I don't know if you ever read any of those books. I read one called Writing Down the Bones, and it was about writing, but you could really apply this principle to anything. And it was really about just putting your pencil on the paper and writing, edit it later, but just let it come out. And because some of us have such a critical mind that we can't even let it come out, right? It's like, this is not good enough. That's not good enough. Just let it come out. Take the judge person away, and just follow the impulse, the creative impulse. And then if you want to tweak it later, or learn not to tweak it later.
I think to also speak to the fact that you're saying like that level of consciousness wanting to break through right now, I think art also wants to come through also, because society's bored with the same repetitive things, whether it's music, different forms of writing, like actually wanting to be fed that educational nourishment, like society, right. Humans want to know the truth now. Like, where did we actually come from? We've been around so long, things like that. Question more.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why we need to tolerate so many different voices, because people have something to contribute.
Yeah, and you don't know who's actually been put here with more information than the next, right? Like, someone may have a message that we don't know. Yeah, that's right.
Right.
How has your understanding of human consciousness evolved throughout your career?
Oh my gosh, it's really evolved. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's hard to put in a nutshell. I think, I would say that as a young person, I was very much trapped in my conditioning, the mindset that I grew up in, the values that I grew up in, the reactive responses that were role modeled for me or not role modeled, just basically what I learned. I think I was born for some reason, I think like many of us, with some impulse to break free of that. I think that was just there. I don't feel like I created that. I feel blessed that I had that. And I think I'm just I think like you, I think there's something in me that just wants to know more and more of the truth and the bigger picture. And so, I think as I worked my way out of the darkest places and the sort of like the little box that I lived in, which was a very self-protective kind of shut down place, as I healed some of what had hurt me and moved out of that very shut down place, the desire to know more about the bigger picture and what we're doing here just grew and grew and grew. And there's just a thirst for that knowledge. So I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah. And the other thing it made me think about was, I know my mom was telling me some experiences recently about how she was walking like such long distances at like a young age, and thinking to myself now, like, we would never let kids like go anywhere on the right, like how times have evolved. But
I did too.
And then like my grandma was taken out of school in like second grade to go work in fields, right? And then so bringing it full circle though, to see where we are with education and people not valuing it anymore, and maybe even these super prestigious colleges becoming just name brands at this point, right? Mm-hmm. It's so interesting to see how the interest in education is like gone in a sense and declining when we work so hard to be able to have that privilege in a sense.
Well, one of the things that I see in my own life and that I've seen over and over and over again, hundreds of times as a therapist, is sometimes people don't really look for change until it gets really bad. And then, life just really isn't working and you're open to reprocess something or grow or learn something new or ask someone for help. And, I think maybe that's what's happening to us as Americans and as a human race, is that we may be hitting a bottom, and that hopefully will be the motivation to really look at ourselves and ask ourselves, what is the conditioning that created this? And that's some of what, my book is about. Like, what is the conditioning that created where we are now? And what can we do with it as a society that we've already learned a lot about how to do that with an individual. How do you go back into your past, undo some of the worst conditioning that you've experienced, and start to believe more positive things about yourself and develop healthier coping mechanisms and become more relational and become, more satisfied in your own creativity or your own self-expression. And if we can do that as individuals, society is a group of individuals. So there's no reason why we can't do that as a society if we actually hold that as a vision for ourselves.
You made me think about, like, how do we tap into that trauma or unlock it? And then I was joking in my head about, the Spartans had it right. They just threw them out in the wild. There's go through it now, it'll weed you out. But right. Yeah, that's the difference, though. Just being, I don't want to say spoiled, but we just don't have the same struggles anymore. What's the most crucial message that you want to leave with listeners about harnessing the power of their minds and spirit?
Yeah, I think we have to heal our hearts. I think that's part of it. I think we have to I think love needs to be part of our politics. And without it, we're just lost. We're not treating other people the way we want to be treated.
The other day I had posted, and this is an Indian Native American thing. I said, when you guys pray, I asked Twitter, do you guys pray for yourself? Do you pray for others? Or do you pray for the earth? Which one do you think was mentioned last?
Ourselves.
It was the earth. Everybody prays for the earth last. And then it really put in perspective, wow, because the Native Americans always said you should pray for the earth first.
Oh, I thought you were asking me what the Native Americans said.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that. Yeah. That's why I answered that way.
Yeah, the poll that I put on Twitter was those three. I asked the public, was what I was saying.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And they were choosing either themselves first or others first, but the earth was always last. And I thought that really put in perspective that humans really think about, and they never give thanks to, like, even being here in existence. Thank you for, like, letting me walk around here and, like, giving me water and providing to the planet, right?
Yeah, and I think it's part of the
and that's our heart. Isn't that a metaphor for our heart? Is the planet our heart?
Absolutely. And it's the mother. And it's the life. It's the life. If the planet's not alive, we're not alive. And I think that's part of the myopathy. What do you call it? Like nearsightedness of modern civilization, that supply is not endless. There's a limited supply of oil in the earth. If we don't protect, the ozone layer, if we pollute the water, it's not like it's an endless source. We have a responsibility. And really what it comes down to on a psychological level that I see is that part of that evolution of consciousness that you and I are talking about is that we're moving out of the me. It's us. We depend on all of us and the earth to survive here. And if we're looking through that lens, that changes our behavior.
I just hate that it's a wealth gap that's going to force that.
Yeah, well, I don't know how the tipping point's going to tip, but what I come back to is, this is my part in the play. Right now, this book is my part in the play. Maybe there'll be another thing that after this that'll be the part that I want to play. You're doing, and I see this with so many people who are doing podcasts, like, you're doing this incredible service because you're allowing one person's voice to be heard by many at a time. And that's a service. That's part of that composite eye. Let's put all these lenses out there. Let's look together. Let's think together.
And as I do more of these, I'm actually more critical on the questions I ask, because I'm like, well, how do I really benefit the people listening? It's not just about getting some controversial clicks. Like, everybody's making headlines for, it's clickbait. Like, that, now when you see my thumbnail or my headline, like, well, the topic actually pertains to what it says.
I wanted to tell you that I'm very impressed with your questions. Like, wow. Really, really thoughtful, really deep, really well thought out, really purposeful. And I really appreciate that.
Wow. It means a lot. I have two more questions. The last one's definitely what it means to be more than rich to you, but this one is, could you discuss how the collective unconscious might be assessed or manifested in group settings or community behaviors?
I think it's manifested all the time in group settings and community behaviors. And I think one of the ways that, so however we're programmed to be a certain role in our family, let's say you're the passive one or the aggressive one, or you're the creative one, or you're the people pleaser, or you're the one who withdraws and doesn't participate, whatever it is you do, or you're the one who becomes so symptomatic that, you create all the drama, whatever our role is. We keep playing that out with each other in larger groups everywhere. And
High
again,
school cliques, lunch tables.
Yep, totally. And, and then there's the kids who are left out. And then there's the kids who have to be the star. And then you have to be next to the star and you have to be liked by the star, or you completely rebel and you toss all that away and you become the rebel, or you become the oddball, or you become the black sheep, or you go on and do something great. But, we just play out what we know without that self-awareness, without some healing. We just keep creating the same drama over and over and over again. And I think it's such a beautiful gift of the best psychology that it brings that all into sharp focus. This is what we're actually doing with each other, and this is how we could heal it. This is how you could learn to play a different part in that play. You don't have to be a people pleaser and sacrifice your whole life to be liked, or you don't have to be an alcoholic to be numbed out to all the pain that you have experienced.
It made me think too that the type of person I was, because I was like, how do you train people to know, like kids, right? Hey, don't segregate, don't, be rude to others, that kind of thing. But the way I dealt with it was I would just not make eye contact with people and go straight to class. I wouldn't hang out in between classes anywhere. So that was the way I would deal with just like, let me just do what I'm supposed to be here. And I skipped a lot of school. Like, I'm not proud to say that at all. I didn't want to be there. I never benefited. I mean, I would get hall passes and just leave on my own time. I didn't feel like there was anything to learn from. And that's not good. And I don't recommend that. And I'm not proud to say that. I'm definitely ashamed of it. But I'm just elaborating on how it felt.
Well, you don't even need to be ashamed of it, really. You were doing the best you could to survive something that was really, really uncomfortable for you, that wasn't serving you, that wasn't welcoming for you. So that's how you adapted. And I think you deserve a lot of compassion, like so many kids who you're just doing the best you can to try to take care of yourself when you don't feel like you belong. And not feeling like you belong is one of the worst pains that a person can experience. It's traumatic not to feel like you belong. And we just cope the best we can. And sometimes our coping mechanisms are not so great.
Do you have any thoughts on Myers-Briggs? I know we didn't really touch on it very much, but I know I'm super deep into it. I know how it affects me. Like, because my own thing, I'll go into public places, meet people, and then maybe not engage or interact the way I should. Maybe not be as personable as I should. Like, I'll just blend into the background on my own and then expect others to engage or something. And I know that's not how the world works, but it's just my own personality.
Is it like a personality, or do you feel like it's a defense that you develop to protect yourself? Like,
I think it's both, but more of my personality. Like, I'm just really introverted. Like, I won't engage with people for the life of me in real life. Just, it'll take, like, unless I need something or I'm going to ask something, but I have no purpose to, like, walk up to someone random. Like, I would never do that,
Well, does it feel like something that you would want to work with, or does it feel like you're comfortable living that way?
I think it's worth working on.
Because there's not a should. There's not a should about it, but what calls to you?
I think if I can work on this, it makes me a better uncle for my own nephews and niece. So that's why, I would, if I can tap into my own childlike senses again and just be more on their level, it helps,
Well, is there something you'd want to try just as an experiment? Because sometimes there's a combination. I've seen this a lot in myself and with many, many people that I've worked with. Part of it is undoing and working with some of the trauma that made you perhaps accentuate your introvertedness as, as a protective mechanism. And sometimes you just sort of have to get out on the court and experiment with a new behavior and tolerate the discomfort of being a little bit more out there or a little bit more sociable or a little bit more engaged, and then bring that back to, if it calls up more that there is to work on. But it's sort of like being out on the court and then working inside, and then being out on the court again and working inside, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of flashed me back in my head because my mom has these videos when I was, I think, 2 years old, and I was like having sentences, and I remember seeing this, like, I was speaking, I was so small and speaking, and you're just in shock because you can't believe, like.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's weird.
That's great.
It's really weird to see like younger videos of yourself. Do you have any just personal thoughts on what would you tell your younger self if you could look back? Any advice?
Oh my gosh. Well, I guess I would tell my younger self that that there's nothing wrong with me, that like there's this beautiful essence inside of me, and whatever is hurting is a result of something that happened. Because I think we internalize the hurtful things that have happened to us, and we believe that they're a reflection of something missing or flawed or defective or less than in ourselves. And I think if I had even had that concept young, I would have probably had to do some work around it, but it would have helped me not just feel like such a flawed human being, which I really did when I was younger. And then I was all about trying not to look that way.
Yeah, like we all do, masking, right?
Right.
Any final thoughts just on anything you want to promote, and then what it means to be more than rich?
Yeah, well, what just tell me what you mean by those words.
Wow, no one's ever asked me that. They usually just go into their own definition. But
right,
the real reason it came up was because as a kid, I went up to my mom and I asked her, "Mom, are we rich?" And she told me in spirit, and it wasn't the answer I wanted. But now that I'm older, I get it completely.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, more than rich to me has nothing to do with money. I mean, I'm glad that I have food, and a good place to live. But more than rich to me is really about the love in our lives. It's about being connected to other people. And when I'm married for the second time, and in my first marriage was a reflection of, unhealed trauma in my life. And my second marriage is a happy one. And I remember when I first got together with my husband thinking, because I had always just wanted to be loved. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be loved. And when I got together with him, one of the things that was just broke through so beautifully into consciousness for me was, oh, it's just as wonderful to have your love received as it is to be loved by someone else. And so it's really all about love and connection and sharing. It really is. I mean, what do people really want? What are they really suffering from when they don't feel connected, when they don't feel valued, when they don't feel appreciated, when they don't feel loved, and when their gifts are not received by other people? So it's both, I think.
Yeah. Now, I've definitely found most of my value from helping others in my whole lifetime, for sure. That's where I've gotten not just the most fulfillment, but actual personal success from helping other people.
Beautiful. Yeah. And look how, it sounds like I don't know that much about your life, but from what you've shared, you've been able to transform your pain into something really beautiful and constructive. And look at what you're doing now. You may be an introvert, but you're a podcast host.
Yeah. And I actually tell people all the time that I think more introverts need to be in front of cameras. Like they have more to say.
Yeah. I think that's really true.
Anything you want to promote?
Well, I really want to promote my latest book. It's called America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. And it's available from all the major booksellers. And I really go into depth about so much of what we're talking about here. And my whole purpose is to bring the best healing principles that I've learned in my life and in the world of psychology to a national conversation, a national agenda, and implementation on a national level, because I really don't think the average person wants to live in a constant state of war and hatred and divisiveness. And, I don't think that's what we want for ourselves. I think people are ready to like learn how to reconnect with one another and feel safe and feel like we belong.
You want to promote your website or email?
Please. Oh, yeah. Thank you. So my website is www.phyllisleavitt.com, and you can read. It's mostly devoted to my present book, America in Therapy, and you can contact me through that, and I'm happy to engage with anyone. I have a free PDF. If you do contact me, I have a free PDF that I put a lot of time and energy into that I think is super readable. And it's called The 6 Elements of Repairing Relationship. And it's all about what we talked about earlier about how do I be responsible? How do I be responsible for healing relationship rather than waiting for you to do it or blaming you because you don't?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'd argue that's a lot of the dating crisis right now, too, with relationships in general.
Mm-hmm.
Very knowledgeable.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're in a culture that blames. We point fingers rather than, oh, who could I be different? How could I talk to you differently? How could I understand you better? How could I modulate the tone of my voice? How could I look at you without rolling my eyes? How could I, tolerate the distress of you really disagreeing with me without walking out?
Yeah, those are great.
Yeah.
Super good. I love, that's a great ending. I'm not going to lie.
Okay, great.
That encapsulates everything. Miss Leavitt, learned a lot. Very insightful episode. Definitely appreciate your time. I will follow up with you when this is out.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.